Hi everyone, and welcome to the 6th episode of our Tarot course series brought to you by 1millionnights.com. Now today we are examining the philosophical, psychological, spiritual, and naturally the most important part, the practical interpretations of the High Priest Tarot card bearing the numerological symbolism of 5. Now, I know that the numerology behind 5 is not the most pleasant and peaceful kind, but actually it resonates perfectly with the High Priest, because if we look at the minor arcana bearing the numerological symbolism of 5, 5 of Cups, 5 of Wands, 5 of Swords, 5 of Coins, all of them depict some kind of crisis. All of them depict a very strong pressure, stress, tension, or a moment of maximum karmic intensity which kind of forces change. When we get the 5 of any of the 4 elements, well, chances are that that negative state is motivating us, forcing us to change our ways, our minds, our feelings, our outlook, our view on life, etc. And this is very important because the core of everything is actually the High Priest, because everything is sourcing from what we believe, our faith, our deepest inner structures, the foundation of everything. And when the foundation is struck by forces of crisis, chaos, change, etc., well, naturally that will manifest in each and every area of our lives. 5 of Swords, for example, that can be self-sabotage or other people sabotaging us, but that also means that we have to allow it one way or another. 5 of Cups, a massive emotional disappointment, disillusioning. 5 of Coins, one of the most unpleasant energies of the tarot, scarcity, illness, being left out in the cold. Or it can be 5 of Wands. Now this card is not really negative for everyone equally, because it can also mean a healthy competition. But regardless of how we look at it, competition still means battle, having to stand up, having to go over the wills of other people. So we might ask ourselves, then how is the High Priestess a card which symbolizes the total opposite, stability, inner structure, faith, when we are truly aligned with what we believe in, and we also embody it, we also manifest it, and it's part of our perception and reality? Well, it is rather simple, because in order to have something stable in our lives, regardless if it's interior or exterior, well, we have to go through changes, we have to learn the lessons, we have to experience the negative side of things so that we can appreciate the positive side of things. And one way or another, everything that we believe has to have some kind of confirmation or reflection in exterior reality. And, if we look at the High Priest card as faith, as, our belief systems, well, then chances are something from external reality had to stimulate us, something had to call us, something had to produce an inner calling for us to go on a spiritual journey to find our faith. That can be something which has absolutely nothing to do with other people. For example, like a vision, a dream, something that we have experienced. Or it can be another person, a parent, a cleric, a true real life priest who inspired us, a holy text or a book that we have read, regardless of when we were a child, or after we stepped into adulthood, or after we reached maturity. It doesn't really matter. What actually matters is that just like the emperor, this is also as above, so below, as within, so without. So faith, especially healthy faith, also has to have some kind of exterior confirmation. But we are going to examine the symbolism of the high priest, what it means rather from a practical sense later on in this recording. Because right now we are going to take a look at the philosophy behind it. Now, as most major arcana, this card also is highly controversial, but this is probably one of the most controversial cards because it has evolved over the ages. As humankind's philosophy, life view, relationship with the divine has evolved, has changed, has been upgraded or downgraded, regardless. The tarot card symbolizing all of this, as in spirituality or basically a belief system, also followed humankind's evolution of this area of life. And because in the present moment we live in a very, very eclectic, multi-dimensional, multicultural, multi-philosophical and spiritual society, this card can mean different things for different readers depending on your culture and on your personal experience. So many authors of tarot cards available today even give it totally different names. For example, some authors totally disregard the fact that it was once a symbol of religion, so it meant that every religion had to have a hierarchical order, and some authors totally shut that part out because in this day and age spirituality has to be free, so they simply name it faith. What a beautiful and inspirational and actually healthy way to look at the high priest from this perspective. Now, other authors keep the symbolism of religion and spirituality in place, but in the sense that they have to adapt it in order so it can reflect a multicultural and multi-philosophical reality, basically our present days. So basically, they eliminate the Judeo-Christian symbolism, in the graphical interpretation of this card, and they just focus on what a priest is in every single culture of the world. Well, a priest is basically a representative of the divine forces, so they simply call it teacher, because that is the essence of every priest. May they be called a shaman, a druid, a witch doctor, a voodoo priest, or simply a cleric, a pastor, a predicator, a cantor, if I'm pronouncing this correctly. And what everyone has in common is that basically they're teachers of morality for their community. While other authors take on a really, really modern approach where, the role and position doesn't really matter. They just focus on a metaphysical perspective that what we truly believe at the very core of our beings is what is going to determine how we are going to experience life, the karmic forces playing out in our lives, and naturally the relationship between ourselves and the divine. And this is where we personally are high priests, regardless of what we believe in, who we are, how we are. Even for atheists, it is their unconscious minds which is the gateway to the divine, so they might not even need any exterior source of a spirituality, so to speak. So in very modern representations of the high priest card, there might not even be a human figure depicted, but something symbolic that your faith, what you believe in, your mindset even, determines your reality and certain outcomes. But of course, all of these philosophies and points of view can be true at the same time. So when you are interpreting the high priest card, it is highly situational, and you just adapt its symbolism to the nature of your question or the situation that you want to examine. So from a very, very practical, down-to-earth perspective, well, the high priest might not have absolutely anything to do with fate in the classical sense, but it rather represents the astrological sign of Taurus. Now, Taurus rules our value systems. It is the symbol of our traditions, our customs, everything that makes us live in a very stable manner, especially inner stability, but naturally outer stability. It can be the symbolism of comfort, where we are totally comfortable in our lives, not just psychologically, but also materially and socially. And since the high priest, when it is symbolizing the sign of Taurus, it is basically the protector and the preserver of the value system. That value system can be something purely personal, or it can be the value system governing the world, your society, your community in the present moment. So very many times the high priest represents the hierarchical ladder in society. It can represent a leader, a ruler, but not like the emperor, but more like someone who is an elder or who has a lot of experience and has been occupying this position for a lot of time. It is also a symbol of authorities, centralized power, like a government, an institution, a mayor, a council member, or something totally not personal, as in just the mayor's institution, just the council itself, the bank. Simply said, a non-physical entity, because that is like a hierarchical structure in the foundations of society. That is how society functions and works. So very, very many times in a tarot reading, the high priest can actually point to relations with the state, relations with an organization, with an institution. At a job, it can represent your boss, your leader, your superior. It can represent the CEO at the mother company. It can represent like an institution or organ of control, which actually comes and controls the industry that your company functions in. Or for example, whenever it comes out as an opportunity or an advice or anything similar, it can represent that you have a chance to climb up the hierarchical ladder. If you're like, for example, self-employed or work as a freelancer, etc., it can represent either help coming from an institution, collaborating with an institution, or the necessity to sort something out with an institution. Now, from a psychological perspective, if we ignore the spiritual side of this card, well, it can actually represent your own value systems. What you hold valuable, what you do not hold valuable, what your goals are based on everything that you love and everything that you like to accomplish in life. It can also represent your status quo and how you feel about it or how you perceive it psychologically. It can also represent your future goals or your immediate goals, but in a sense that this is what you have to preserve, protect, make sure that it's permanent, that it is not threatened by outer forces. Because just as the sign of Taurus, this card represents permanency, groundedness, stability. So it is not a one-time offer, for example. It is something, regardless if it's psychological, material, has to do with your job, it has to do with your career. It is something that you want in your life stable for a lot of years, for example, until retirement, or until something changes drastically in your life. But this is also the irony, because you can muster this inner psychological forces to protect and preserve and do everything in your power to have this stability. Because once you knew and experienced how it is to be without, how not to have this stability, how bad it feels not to have this stable structure and foundation in your life, as I say, regardless if it's psychological, like a relationship, a commitment, a job, a secure career, for example, or basically a psychological well-being. It can be absolutely anything. Also, from a non-spiritual perspective, very many times the high priest symbolizes getting married officially, and then, it symbolizes either the priest, the cleric, the representative of religion who authorizes the marriage, the mayor, the captain of the ship, etc. Or it can symbolize, you with your partner going, signing the paper, and when you sign it, it becomes grounded in physical reality, but also psychologically, because it's a new reality. You are sharing your life from every single perspective with the person who you have chosen. Now, from a spiritual perspective, this card represents the earthly embodiment of the divine masculine from a spiritual perspective. So just as the high priestess was the earthly embodiment of the female spiritual element, which was much more intuitive, which was, she always worked with her inner world, with her unconscious mind. This is the male symbol of spirituality embodied. But who works with rationality? Who works with knowledge? Who works with traditions? For example, holy texts, prayers, rituals. Now, ritual is a key word here, because from a spiritual perspective, that is the sign of Taurus. It bases itself on a ritual because, it worked for maybe tens of thousands of years if it's like a very old tradition, a very old ritual. So it is almost atemporal. It is still as much alive today as it was back then. Like, for example, some Catholic prayers, some Christian rituals, which are actually set in stone because you always have to respect the patterns, the rituals, the candles, how you have to organize things. So, all of this has much to do with the sign of Taurus and the divine masculine, because this is how the divine masculine usually approaches spirituality, by experience, by knowledge, by know-how. And its most healthiest expression is not blind faith, because you experienced it over and over and over again, and it always worked. So of course it is part of your inner truth, and it is part of your spiritual and psychological methodology. But of course, in a healthy faith, the feminine and masculine elements are not separate. So they can work with each other in perfect harmony, where there is a touch of intuition, self-knowledge, and chaos, the high priestess, but there is also practical life experience, know-how, and elements that we have, acquired from others or from tradition, etc. And when these two are in harmony and they represent the stability, well, then that means you are a very spiritual person practicing something really, really constructive and healthy. Because on one hand, the high priestess, healthy faith always questions itself. There's always has to be some kind of doubt. There is always like a scorpionic investigative energy. Because on one hand, it has to make sense to you personally. But on the other hand, you cannot always have doubt. You cannot always question. You cannot live in a permanent state of confusion. So the high priest, the male element, actually helps this high priestess have a foundation, have a stability, and she can practice her intuitive spirituality freely because, the inner structure protects her and gives her the inner sacred space. But of course, understand all of this symbolically, because both the high priestess and high priest are inside the soul and mind and inner being of one single person, as in us. Now let's move on to the symbolism of the high priest in a very practical way, as in within the tarot reading. Its positive expressions have to do with faith, confidence, it has to do with life experience, it has to do with a lot of lived and experienced wisdom, having learned from the mistakes of the past and embodying that wisdom. So the symbolism of the teacher. Another way to approach this is faith and the power of belief over matter and over anything. When you believe in something very, very strongly and you make that permanent, when you give it structure, well, it's going to upgrade and manifest in your life regardless of how we look at it. But naturally, it does require perseverance and doing this over and over and over again until it is deeply rooted into your unconscious mind. It can also represent a father figure, a grandfather, an older male with a lot of wisdom, benevolence, and life experience. It can represent a person occupying a high social or economic or within a company a high position. A person, especially a male, with a lot of influence. It can also represent a very religious and spiritual person. As an advice, for example, it can simply mean what you believe is actually true for you, so keep on doing what you're doing. Otherwise, it can represent to have self-confidence and fully believe in your qualifications, in your masteries, in your skills and talents, something that you have, proven yourself and others over and over again. Other times it can simply represent that faith, spirituality, maybe a ritual or religion or a religious way of going about things is the answer to your question. But regarding the sign of Taurus, it can also represent value, material goods, material security, social security, stability, or for example, in uncertain times, it can represent that someone like a family member, a very dear friend, or someone who is older than you, who is a part of your life, has got your back regardless, so fear nothing. But as I said earlier, it highly depends on the situation and the circumstances of the reading and the question. Now, its negative and unfavorable interpretations are also very crystal clear. It can mean that your faith, what you believe, and the patterns strongly programmed in your unconscious are acting against your highest good. It can mean that you're losing your stability, you're losing your groundedness. For example, your job, your career is being threatened by exterior forces, so be ready for a demotion or to step down or someone else to take your place. It can represent fanaticism, religious fanaticism, for example, or the negative influence of religion and spirituality. But at the same time, it can also represent fanaticism in absolutely anything. It doesn't have to be religious in nature. It can also represent a really toxic and egocentric self-worth, that basically you're the center of the universe, and because you're so beautiful, wonderful, special, you deserve all good in life, which might not be untrue normally, but when karmic forces tell you otherwise, well, then is when the high priest is reversed and its symbolism is telling you to, get down from Mount Olympus because you're not a god and you're not the center of the universe yet. It can also represent a toxic male, a toxic father figure, but not the way the emperor would be symbolizing this male toxicity, because the emperor simply dominates with the power of its will. This is where the high priest is highly intelligent and manipulates, lies, deceives. It makes you feel safe and secure, but you are following its own highest good without even realizing it. So it's toxicity in the form of manipulation. It is not really his way or the highway like the emperor would tell you, but it's more like a spiritual seduction, a programming, a manipulation. It can also represent overprotection from a parent or from a partner, especially if you're a female and the high priest represents your partner. Well, it can mean that your partner wants your highest good and wants to protect you, but it's suffocating you. It doesn't even allow you an opinion to make up your mind about something and express it. Of course, it's for your highest good because it's out of love, but it's the wrong kind of love. And perfectly valid with a parent, perfectly valid with a teacher, mentor, trainer, guru, priest, cleric, representative of spirituality. So a high priest in reverse position can represent that all of this is already toxic, and yes, you're laying stable foundations, but they're already poisoned, so to speak, so they won't lead to anything positive. And of course, if it's a symbol of officialities, the high priest reverse can mean the end of a contract, the end of a commitment. It can mean, for example, divorce, that you're leaving the company, you're leaving a situation of life which offered you stability, or your inner stability is changing, it is being uprooted, but it doesn't have to be anything negative, it is just a change, a necessary change. Now let's take a look at the combination of the high priest with other cards. Now, as I said, the high priest combined with the lovers, for example, 2 of cups, for example, 3 of cups, for example. It can either mean a marriage, you get married, you enter into a long-term committed relationship, even if it's unofficial, or with the 3 of cups, you are invited to someone's wedding, christening, something which involves celebrating a commitment or celebrating someone's life changing. High priest with 3 of coins, maybe a new job offer, but one where you occupy a superior position. Or it can represent that someone highly influential sees the worth and value in you and invites you to join a company, etc. High priest combined with 2 of coins, your material life is changing, upgrading for the better, but it's a slower but very stable process. High priest with the 8 of coins, it can represent either new studies or finishing new studies and entering into the practical phase. High priest with high priestess, for example, it can be a massive spiritual upgrade, or maybe a powerful inner epiphany that can actually help you and change your life for the long-term future. Or the high priest combined with any of the aces, it can represent a powerful and massive new opportunity, spontaneously, unexpectedly, instantly heading your way. High priest combined with the fool, for example, or with the empress, for example. Well, for males it can mean becoming a father, or it can also mean that the inner biological clock is ringing, that you are ready for fatherhood. For females it can mean pregnancy or imminent plans to establish a family, or you are entering a phase in your life where you're ready to have a child or another child. A high priest with the 10 of coins, it can represent an inheritance, big money coming from, for example, your family, a very, very rich and wealthy relative, from the state, a compensation or something. High priest with the 6 of coins, a massive and big donation. But in reverse position, it is you who have to help someone, either with donation or with your influence. Now let's take a look at the more negative representations of this card. High Priest with the Devil. Now this is one of the worst combinations because it signifies that someone or something is manipulating you, or it can represent crimes of sexual nature. It can represent seduction. It can also represent help and really significant gains, but with a really, I don't even know what word to use, a really hard to accept compromise or strings attached to it. High Priest, Devil, and Two of Cups, for example, or Two of Cups reversed, it can mean a third-party situation, infidelity in marriage, someone trying to invade your personal life. High Priest with the Seven of Swords, for example, a really unfavorable, disadvantageous contract, for example, a loan from a bank, which, has terms and conditions which are outside your sphere of awareness. High Priest with the Tower, it can mean a massive upheaval of your faith, of your spirituality, what you believe, or your material life. High Priest with the Three of Coins reversed, for example, termination of your job. High Priest along with Nine of Swords, Ten of Swords, Three of Swords, it can mean a really, really severe disappointment or someone hurting you, even without the intent to hurt you, but whatever they do, it might leave a certain kind of trauma, something which you will find really, really hard to forgive. High Priest with the Star reversed, it can mean that your faith or what you believe or what you hope for is gonna manifest, but not the way you expect. And if you have strong expectations attached, you're definitely gonna be disappointed. High Priest with Five of Wands, a spiritual, ideological, philosophical, mediatic, maybe a social media kind of battle. High Priest with the Death card, it can represent a massive change, and it doesn't matter if it's something internal or external, but it will simply reconfigure your life. But of course, this doesn't necessarily mean that it's anything negative. High Priest with the Four of Swords or Four of Swords reversed, for example, it might be a message that you really, really need to take life a little bit less seriously and just rest your mind, rest your emotional world, and just have a little bit of fun or enjoy life a little bit more. High Priest with the, let's say, Nine of Cups or Ten of Cups, something really, really good, positive, uplifting, a major source of happiness or joy is entering your life, but from other people, through other people, maybe friends, family, etc. But of course, as I mentioned earlier, this is one of those cards which is really, really circumstantial, because not only can it mean so very many different things, but also its symbolism and the way readers and spiritualists perceive this card throughout the years has evolved and changed so very many times. So the best idea is to just make up your own mind and see what the High Priest means for you personally. And finally, I would like to close this course by saying that regardless from which perspective we look at this card, materially, socially, spiritually, philosophically, metaphysically, in magic, for example, the Golden Dawn system, its core symbolism is still what we believe determines our reality. If reality is basically created by our perceptions, well then our perceptions are influenced by our beliefs. So it is almost like a quantumly interconnected network inside our inner beings. And the stability and the specific individual balance of these interconnected elements basically form the high priest, the sign of Taurus, of our value systems. And our value systems are also who we truly are here on earth. Well, thank you so much for listening. Please don't forget to check out our website, 1millionnights.com, where you can find more articles just like this one. You can also find a lot of free readings and horoscopes. And if you would like a personal reading, just choose one of our dedicated advisors. Thank you for your time and patience to listen to this recording. Until next time, bye for now.